Well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here to talk about the new Charlie and the Chocolate Factory prequel, Wonka. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So the world's most famous chocolatier is once again finding himself back onto the big screen. He's bringing with him, as expected, a lot of fantastical, tasty, yummy-looking treats, as well as a lot of songs. Because Wonka, although the trailers didn't exactly make it clear, in the promotional material, this is a musical. This is a very kind of song-heavy film that does sort of tell the origin story of Willy Wonka, kind of what led him to become the famous, chocolate maker that we know him from, sort of the original film. Is a movie that I don't know if a lot of people were necessarily just dying to find out what happened. Where did this guy come from? Did we really need sort of an origin story? Although I do think the trailers did sort of promise kind of a fun, whimsical type, kind of magical adventure. Is Wonka that film? Is it sort of a successful return to sort of Willy Wonka's crazy imagination? I think that question will largely depend on just sort of how much of a sweet tooth you have. Because I should say right from the start that I actually saw this movie with my two 8-year-old twin boys, and they're not necessarily the most sort of demanding movie critics in the industry, but they both loved it. This is 10 out of 10 for across the board for both of them. So I did want to, they are maybe more the target audience, and hey, they seem like they were pleased with what they're saying. But I don't know about me. Maybe I just need to sink my teeth into some delightful Wonka chocolate and kind of get over my adult cynicism, because I found myself much less enthused about this film. Which is not necessarily to say that I think this is a bad film. I don't. I think there's some good moments in this. I just don't think overall that it's a very good film. I think sort of despite some of the sort of the fun and the whimsy and just sort of the spectacle of some of the songs, I think the overall experience of this movie just is sort of pretty unsatisfying. And Wonka is an original story, so I don't think it's necessarily fair to compare it to the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, because it's not a remake. It's not trying to sort of remake that movie. It is doing largely its own thing. But I think kind of by comparing some of those movies, sort of helped me understand what about Wonka just wasn't quite clicking with me, because I do think these films take very different, despite having the same characters and sort of backstory, they do take very different approaches to just sort of their tone and just sort of their storytelling approach. Because in the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, sort of the chocolate factory itself very much represented this sort of magical oasis, sort of set in the middle of just sort of the harsh realities of life. It was very much like our world that we lived in, and sort of this enticing hope or kind of vision, this dreamlike place that we could go, and it was filled with candy and just sort of this joyous experience. Kind of in contrast to that, Willy Wonka kind of takes the absurdist sort of fantastical elements of the factory and then sort of wraps the entire world in those elements, which results in kind of a more cartoonish, kind of more like a fantastical, setting and world building all the way around, which I do think dilutes this sort of the magic of the original and kind of loses some of that escapist joy that the factory represented, and kind of ends up falling into more of just sort of offering audiences weird and bizarre and quirky rather than kind of, instilling wonder in them. And I think there's also just kind of the question of Willy Wonka himself as a character. Obviously, despite some fairly big shoes to fill, I do think Timothy Chalamet, who plays Willy Wonka, I think he's good in this. I think he does have enough of the charisma and just sort of this infectious positivity that is able to carry the story. But I think kind of like the sugary sweets in his shop, there is sometimes a case of just sort of too much of a good thing. I think this is a character that does work better in smaller doses. I think the original Willy Wonka was sort of this enigmatic, kind of mysterious character that was sort of on the fringe of Charlie's story in that. But I think by taking that character and putting him front and center, sort of having him lead the story, sort of, he's just a little bit too quirky, a little bit too unrelatable to sort of have that same sort of function. And even later in the film, when he does sort of have more, or attempt to have more, to convey genuine human emotions and sort of, his character, it's just hard as an audience to fully buy into that, because he is such sort of an eccentric and just sort of quirky, almost inhuman character. Kind of in contrast to Willy Wonka's character, to me, sort of this film's surprising standout character is a girl named Noodles, who is played by a newcomer 14-year-old Kayla Lane, who's an orphan girl that becomes sort of Willy Wonka's first sort of ally and friend. And she is fantastic in this. She is, in many ways, she serves sort of as the Charlie role in this film by providing the audience with a more grounded, like relatable protagonist to sort of counterbalance sort of the crazy zaniness of Willy Wonka. And I think kind of through her eyes, the audience is allowed to experience sort of some of that sense of wonder that the film, I think, kind of otherwise lacks. And I think overall, this film definitely works best when it is leaning into that very kind of warm and touching dynamic between those two characters. Because there are other kind of quirky, fun side characters that do make an appearance, although most of them just aren't given enough to do to make any kind of impression, with maybe the exception of Hugh Grant, who appears sort of as amusingly as an Oompa Loompa, although he is used quite sparingly in this film as well. Like I said, this is a musical, so we got to talk about the music in this. And I think overall, the music in this movie is fine, although I think kind of like some of those side characters, it doesn't leave as strong of like a lasting impression as perhaps it could have. I think the songs tend to be used more just as like storytelling narrative devices to kind of move the story along, rather than trying to sort of introduce a bunch of fun sing-alongs. Because even like moments like in the parking lot of the theater after this movie, I struggled to remember any of the songs, kind of the new songs in this movie, beyond two sort of returning legacy songs like the Oompa Loompa song and the Pure Imagination by Willy Wonka. But despite them not necessarily just sort of being hit sing-along songs, I do think these musical sequences, even as someone that isn't necessarily a big musical guy, they are fun. They do provide some fun spectacle, and there are some, like there's one with Noodles and Willy Wonka where they're sort of flying with a bunch of balloons sort of through the nightscape and through the city, and I think it is effective. It does sort of convey sort of that fun, immersive kind of sense of wonder. And one other thing too, we'll get into, I think there is a few maybe content things as Christians to, or just as parents to be aware of, and we'll get into that in just one second. But I think just sort of overall, I think the tone of this movie does have a bit of a sharper bite than maybe you expected. Because the story has, I guess, a evil chocolate cartel and corrupt cops and attempted murders and like abusive, landlords. And I don't necessarily think that this is like inaccessible to younger viewers. Again, my kids are 8. They both loved this movie, but it does feel like it is a bit more like maybe like a tween audience rather than aiming to the kids. And I do think maybe some of the humor and stuff might make parents of younger kids a little uncomfortable. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this film, as far as language, I counted maybe one, maybe two sort of minor profanities, and then one other a character that says God, but nothing beyond that. Violence, really nothing here either. There is a character that's commissioned to go kind of as like a hitman to take out Wonka, working for the cartel, and he does sort of rough up Willy Wonka and like push his face in the water and hit him over the head with a blunt object, but there's really no violence or blood or anything in this film. As far as sexuality, I don't think there's really much going on here either, although there might be, there is a few things, and kind of one, there is a scene where Wonka is kind of giving advice to a man, essentially how to sort of like be seductive to a woman, and he repeats a mantra that says, "Women are thankful for an ankle, pleased for some knees, but if you want to make her sigh, show her some thigh." And this man kind of takes that to heart, and then in a later scene you do see him sort of show up, and he has these like very tight, very high shorts that are showing off his thighs, and he kind of bends over to sort of show off his backside, which seemingly much to the pleasure of this lady, because then in a couple scenes later someone comes to the door, and that woman answers the door, and she's in like a very silky kind of nightgown, and then this man walks in the background wearing like a matching kind of real silky gown, and that couple is seen kind of flirting and kissing kind of later in other scenes throughout this film. One other content thing that I think Christians are going to have different ways of sort of what they think of this, whether it's offensive or blasphemy or just harmless. But sort of the chocolate cartel in this, their like home base, their lair is located like beneath like the ground of a chapel, and kind of like the priest, and then it says 500 chocolatier monks are very much like in on the scheme. They are sort of these corrupted sort of clergy and religious people, and like several scenes take place in that church, and like the monks almost like communicate in like an ominous or like kind of Gregorian chant type speaking, and like the main priest, who's played by none other than Mr. Bean himself, is like he kind of controls the gateway to get down to the lair, which is in the confessional booth, and he kind of pushes like a crucifix across down, which as a lever that allows like the elevator to go down. And like kind of later, as like chaos ensues in this in this church. He makes comments like judgment has come, or that he sold his soul for 30 pieces of chocolate, or that he's a sinner and as a weak and wicked chocoholic. So like I said, I think this will depend a little bit on whether as a Christian you think this is like mocking Christianity. I don't necessarily think it's doing that. These priests and monks are clearly depicted as being wrong, that they're sort of corrupted, and it sort of fits with what the story is telling. But I do think maybe just like the frequent use of sort of religious language and imagery just might rub some Christians the wrong way. As far as themes, kind of things going on beneath the surface of this, I took my two kids to this and I sort of asked them after what this movie was about. And sort of both of them, their takeaway was this is a movie just about greediness and about kind of the importance of sharing. And I do think that is a very astute observation for them, because I think in many ways, like the chocolate in this film is sort of symbolic, and it can be symbolic of various things like dreams and kind of aspirations and stuff. But I think one of the most like overt, direct ways that this the chocolate kind of represents is just money. Because like in the film, characters literally use chocolate as money. They pay off the cops with chocolate, and like they pay people for their help by making them chocolate. So it's very much sort of exploring just sort of our relationship to kind of material things and money. And obviously the Bible, like in 1 Timothy 6:10, where it says, for the love of money is the root of all evil. You kind of see that play out kind of in this film, where like the chocolate itself is kind of neutral. It can be good, it can be bad, but you sort of see like the obsession with chocolate kind of leads various characters kind of to their destructive downfall. And like, especially for younger viewers, like the most stark visuals for that is sort of the chief of police that seems like he's like a reluctant kind of participant in some of the evil schemes of the cartel, but because of his sweet tooth, he just can't say no to chocolate. And you kind of see as he gets pulled deeper and deeper into this chocolate addiction that like, he almost like comically, says he gains like 300 pounds through the course of this film, and every scene he's like a little larger, which I think it is sort of a very clear, just sort of visual representation of just sort of that descent into greed and to sin. But in a positive sense, sort of in contrast to just sort of the greed and gluttony and selfishness of like the cartel and other characters in this story, Willy Wonka does serve as like an example of just using his chocolate, using his resources to bless all the people around him. And like there is sort of his an emotional moment at the end of this film where he does kind of learn it was never about just the chocolate as a thing, but it was always more about sort of who he could share that chocolate with and the joy that he could give and share and bless and help. So again, I think as Christians, especially maybe parents talking with younger kids after seeing this movie, there are some positive messages just about being selfless and sort of spreading our blessing onto others. I think in the end, Wonka is not a movie that's going to change anyone's opinions about whether we needed a musical Willy Wonka origin story. I'll admit that I was about as excited about this film as I am to reschedule my 2 years overdue dentist appointment. This is not a film that I found myself drawn to, although I did think some of the trailers looked fun. And I do think that there are some fun moments. There are some enjoyable spectacle and just sort of moments of sort of fun, positive whimsy. I'm glad my two kids enjoyed it. But kind of outside of the character of Noodles, who I thought was fantastic, I think I just struggled to feel any kind of emotional attachment or investment to any of these characters, sort of anything else, like the events that were taking place. I do think Wonka is different enough as a musical and just sort of has a different tone to not feel like just a needless remake of an already beloved original, but I think it does lack the same sort of immersive sense of wonder that made that original such like an enduring classic. But hey, I'd love to hear what you guys think. If you're seeing this alone as an adult, or if you're bringing your kids, jump into the comments section. Let's have a conversation. Let me know what you like, what you didn't like, sort of some of your thoughts about the themes and things going on in this film. And if you haven't done so, I encourage you guys, subscribe to our channel, become a Collider, get lots of movie reviews and podcasts and interviews and just other fun stuff. Would love to have you be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe, have a great Christmas, and continue to collide with your world for Christ.